Howdy, y'all, and welcome to the EEARSS podcast produced by Terrier TV. What's up, guys? How goes it?
You didn't even introduce yourself. Come on.
I know at this point,
teach you
when
manners.
people are actually asking questions, wondering where the second version of me is at, I think maybe they figured it out.
I'm Frank Rob,
I am.
or Alligator Rob.
Well, sometimes I get confused which way to go with it. So,
or Rob.
see, now we've said it.
See, I've said it, but
Yeah.
you still haven't said it.
I am Frank Rob, and
just-
we're joined by Bill, Cindy, and our special guest today, Laurilee Thompson. How are you doing, ma'am?
I'm just fine. How are you doing today?
Awesome. So what's been going on, guys? Anything exciting going on?
Well, you know, the Terriers are in the state playoffs, so we got that going.
Yay. I went
Yeah.
to school here, you know.
Oh, okay.
A long time ago.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
There
It
you
didn't
go.
look like it does now.
Well, you know, we're coming up soon on our 100th anniversary.
Yeah, well, I wasn't here
27.
that long ago.
Well, I understand that. No, I didn't mean
my
that.
mother almost
mean
was, though. But
So
Wow.
1927
yeah,
is
she graduated from here, too.
when it was
Wow.
established at this site. But I think it was earlier downtown. It was downtown earlier.
Well, she graduated from here when
Okay.
it was the beautiful Spanish
Oh, the beautiful
style,
building, yeah.
Wow.
in 1949.
Oh, okay.
How
Wow.
amazing is that?
Wow.
Yeah, I'm in 1971.
Okay. Yeah, my pop was here, and I think he graduated in 72. Yep.
Now, do you remember how many were in your graduating class?
It was the second largest graduating class ever. It was about, I think there was over 700,
Wow.
and I think the largest graduating class was 72, and there was 750 then.
Yeah, that was the big boom. Yeah, that was. I
With the
started
space
in.
boom and
I started in '95, and we had 600 at
Uh-huh.
that time. But that was before in Port St. John,
Right,
Spacecoast
okay.
opened.
okay,
So, but yeah, 72, and then you got astronaut.
right.
Then astronaut opened, and that brought it down
Mm-hmm.
What's
Yeah.
normal now for a graduating class?
around 300. Around 300 is where we are.
Yeah, there was portables everywhere. It was like 20 minutes in between classes because we were using the Gibson Annex also.
Oh yeah.
So we had to walk back and
Okay,
forth.
they were
between
crossing
Gibson.
the railroad
We were crossing
tracks.
the
Wow.
railroad tracks, crossing the street.
Yeah.
Different time
yeah,
for
we can't
sure.
do that anymore.
Yeah.
no,
they
that
wouldn't-
would
they
never
wouldn't let
work. That
happen.
would never work.
No.
Never ever work. Yeah. So, like I was saying, there were people that were actually asking me this week about where the second version of me was at. Which I didn't realize that the second version of me was missing. So,
Yep.
People thought Bill was mad at me. Yep. I do
told
still
him he needs
exist.
to just sit there and pet your head.
Yep. Or just sit there and bobble my own head and pretend like I'm that and let that do the talking. Yeah, that'd be the.
I don't think that's really going to work.
going to.
But,
Oh
you
Lord.
know.
You guys ready to jump into this?
Yes, sir. Let's
Okay.
do it.
All right, let's jump into this. Miss Laurilee, thank you for being here. So, your family's been here in Titusville for a long time. How many generations have been here?
Well, it depends on if you want to count the first generation as being born here or whether they came here. I count whether they came here.
Right.
So my
Yeah.
great-great-grandfather came up the St. Johns River on a paddle wheeler and bought a trapper's cabin at Blue Springs State Park, and our house, our ancestral home, is still standing there at Blue Springs State Park, and that was 5 generations ago.
Wow.
But I have grand nieces and nephews that are like 8th generation Floridians.
That's amazing.
Oh wow.
That's amazing.
I think I've been in that. I've been at the state park there, and there's a house
wait,
there.
let me correct myself. I think it's 7th generation.
Wow.
7th.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's fabulous in the house.
Oh yeah, that
Yeah.
house is great.
Yeah, that little toy cannon that's in the kitchen, that belonged to my dad when he was a little boy, but it came from the house. It actually came from the Thursby house. And some of the furniture that's in there, my grandmother had gotten down through the years, but when the state bought the house and refurbished it, she gave it back to the state.
Oh,
So
wow.
we can walk through the house and say, oh, the birthing couch? Oh, yeah, that
Wow.
belonged to Faye, my grandmother. And
Wow.
the toy cannon belonged to my dad. And
Oh wow.
That's
it's-
absolutely
That's
amazing.
crazy.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing. That's got to feel pretty awesome to have those kind of connections.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So so your family early on, is that where you got your kind of your wildlife connection, your love for wildlife? And
Absolutely. I had 2 sets of grandparents, the Watwoods, who were very organized, and my in fact, my grandfather Watwood was the postmaster here in Titusville for decades. And then when he retired, he got on the Planning and Zoning Commission, and he was chair of the Planning and Zoning Commission, actually during the period of time when Titusville was really, really growing. And he would go down to Miami Beach for the postmaster conventions, and he saw what was coming. He saw him tearing down the little mom and pop hotels on Miami Beach and putting up these monstrous condominiums and big hotels. And he said, we don't want that in Titusville. So one of the coolest things he did was to get an ordinance passed that you couldn't build anything more than 2 stories tall next to the river. And that ordinance stayed in place for a long time, but it obviously isn't in place anymore. So that was like the prim and proper side of the family. And then the Thompson side, they ran the Titusville Fishing Pier. So when, right after World War II, when they were tearing down the old wooden Walker Bridge, which was the first bridge across the Indian River up here on the north end, my grandfather went to the mayor and he said, why would we tear down that perfectly good west side of the bridge? We could but make a fishing pier out of it. And Blinker Dre, who Dre Field was named after, Blinker Dre was the city manager back then. And so him and Blinker worked on the city council, and they got permission from the Army Corps of Engineers to leave the western structure of the bridge standing. And my grandfather added some more parts to it and built a house out there. And when you see the old postcard, the world's longest free fishing pier, that's what it was like.
Wow.
And so that's where I grew up, literally was on that fishing pier and in the river. And my dad built fiberglass boats. He was a pioneer in the fiberglass boat building industry in the early 1960s. And so I learned how to grind fiberglass and weld and stuff like that when I was really little. And that's how I got started, I guess.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I feel like I jumped ahead by asking that question because you have such a unique love for wildlife. We see the graphic up there on the screen that shows you run and own and operate Dixie Crossroads. So tell us about the journey from growing up here to being a restaurant owner to being really someone who's that does so many things. I mean, it's hard to put a title on what you do because you do so many amazing things.
Yeah,
so tell us a little bit about that.
Half the time I don't know what I'm going to be doing when I wake up in the morning, and I have to keep a calendar and put all this stuff in it, and then plans will change. But our family's always thrived on chaos. So like I said, I started out with the fishing pier. Our house has been torn down now, but we lived on the causeway right across where the 3 condos are now, and then there's Sandpoint Park, and there's that little boat ramp that's in Sandpoint Park. Our 2-story house used to be next to that little boat ramp, and that's where I grew up. My dad built a section added to the pier that curved around, and it came all the way to where our house was. So we could get out to the pier without going out on the highway. We weren't allowed to go out on the highway because back then the traffic on the causeway was nuts because there was so many people working out at the Cape. So we weren't allowed to go out on the road, but we could get out to the pier by just going down the dock. So when I was about 10 years old, my dad built a larger bait well, and he rented rowboats there. And he built a bigger bait well in one of the rowboats and put a little motor on it and says, time for you to go to work. So he would load every morning during the summertime, he'd load me in that little rowboat in the back of his pickup truck, and he'd take me up to Hallover Canal, and he would just dump me and the boat off at Hallover Canal. Think about doing that with your 10-year-old kid now. You'd be arrested.
Not.
You couldn't do it. But it was a different time back then. And I'd spend the whole day hanging around at Hallover Canal and pushing my net around and catching shrimp. And I sold them to my grandfather, collected money every day. And, I did that for several summers. And
That's
then
so cool.
after that, Dad said, well, let's build some pigfish traps, and you can start catching pigfish for your grandfather, too. So we built pigfish traps, and I added pigfish money to my shrimp money. and then one of the older commercial fishermen one summer said, why are you selling all your pigfish to your grandfather? He said, you should keep some of them and catch trout with them, because you make a lot more money selling trout than you can selling pigfish for bait. And so that guy taught me how to use a splatter pole, and splatter pole for spotted sea trout. Now, there's an art to splatter poling. I don't know if you've ever tried it. Most people use a cane pole. I was using a fiberglass antenna rod because it was a lot more limber than a cane pole was. But
And it'll still get you where you want to go, won't it?
hey, absolutely. But you want to sit on the back of the boat and let the wind. First, you got to find out where you want to fish, and you want to fish right where the seagrass starts breaking up. And so you got patches of sand and patches of seagrass out in about 4 to 6 feet of water. You catch smaller fish if you're closer to shore where the grass is like a carpet. So you want to fish that edge, but you got to figure out which way the wind's blowing, to get the longest drift. And you sit on the back of the boat and you hold the pole, kind of like this, and the line's tight because the wind's pushing you, and you keep the line tight. And every once in a while, you just bump the bottom of the pole with your hand, and that sends a motion up to the tip of the pole, and it goes down the line, and that makes a pigfish get dumped upside down, and that makes it mad, right? So it starts squealing like a little pig. That's why they call them pigfish. And almost every time you can feel it through the line and through the pole. You can feel it, and when I just thumped the floor. I heard it. You were right. But
it goes along with the story perfectly.
Yep.
Though.
Well,
Yeah.
okay. Once that pigfish starts squealing, within a few seconds, a big trout would hit it.
Wow.
Sometimes I'd catch a big shark. Sometimes I'd catch a big redfish, and it was exciting. And so after that, true greed set in, and I got a bigger boat, a 23-foot fiberglass boat, with a big Johnson motor on it. And my friends from school, by now I'm in high school, and my friends from school helped me build 150 blue crab traps, and I started running blue crab traps every afternoon after school. And then
That's quite an operation for a high schooler.
yeah, so then right after I graduated, I got my first bank loan. My grandfather Watwood took the risk and co-signed for me to borrow $1,500, which was a lot of money back then, from the flagship bank. And I bought 500 yards of gill net. Somebody gave me a beat-up old bow runner mullet boat, and I bought an engine and 500 yards of gill net. And then I really got serious about fishing. And I started spending nights out on the lagoon, doing my homework under a 15-watt pickup light, sitting on an ice chest doing homework while my net's soaked in the lagoon. I was a senior in high school then, and we had some good parties too. We could use my boat to ferry people out to the island. And
Oh, yeah. Yeah, okay.
so you sit on the causeway and flash your headlights, and then I'd come in my boat and pick people up, take them out
That's
to the
awesome.
Now the islands are gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're gone.
Yep, they're
And
all
it's so
washed
sad.
away. Yep.
And it's because some of the things that the regulators decide are in our best interest, sometimes I don't think they are. But years ago, they decided that it would be best to allow the spoil islands to wash away because they weren't there to begin with. But those spoil islands are tremendous habitat, and
They are.
there's seagrass that grows around the edges, and gulls and terns and shorebirds nest on them. Horseshoe crabs spawn on the beaches. Think about it. There's almost no sandy beaches left in the whole Indian River Lagoon.
Yep.
Over 90% of it's hard armored now with rocks and seawalls. So there's nowhere for the horseshoe crabs to spawn. And as a result, our Titusville Causeway, which is like the last public causeway left in Brevard County that still has a sandy beach, it's the most significant horseshoe crab spawning beach in the entire state of Florida. So that's one thing I do now. I don't kill fish anymore. I count them. So I count horseshoe crabs, and I'm a volunteer for FWC's Linked with Limulus horseshoe crab program. And so when they added the north side of the Titusville Causeway to their list of, they started out on the west coast of Florida, and then when they shifted and started adding sites on the east coast, and they based it on the number of citizen reports to their website of where people had seen spawning horseshoe crabs. Well, there's always a ton of people on the north side of the causeway until they put the fence up. But there was always a bunch of people on the north side of the causeway. So, of course, they saw the horseshoe crab spawning. And so they added that. And there's really good volunteers to work with. It's tons of fun. We're always looking for more volunteers, guys. And so they added the north side of the Titusville Causeway, and when they did that, the north side of the Titusville Causeway right away became the most important horseshoe crab spawning place that they knew of in the state. So I went to them and I said, well, why aren't you doing the south side? You know, there's way more crabs on the south side of the causeway than there is on the north side. And so they said, well, you know, we don't want to change anything, but, you know, if you want to send in some reports and count some crabs on the south side of the causeway, we'll look at it and we'll consider it. So they called it a wind survey. It wasn't an official thing. So I sent in a bunch of wind surveys. Well, the next year, the south side of the causeway got added. And that year, we counted 60,000 crabs on the Titusville Causeway, 10,000 on the north side, and 50,000 on the south side. So,
Wow.
So let me tell you about our causeway. Is that okay?
Please.
Oh, yeah.
Am I
please
doing?
do.
Yeah,
No,
You're doing great.
Okay.
You're doing
You're doing
great.
good.
All right. I thought you were going to ask me questions, but I haven't given you time. I'm supposed to be talking about my childhood.
No, you're not. No, we're
you're,
talking
you're-
about.
you're doing great.
You're doing great.
Go- Go right
All
ahead.
Good. So, now I forgot what I was talking about.
You were talking
I
about,
was talking about the horseshoe crabs.
in the causeway.
And the causeway. We have the best causeway on the whole east coast of Florida, because if you look at Google Earth and you look at every causeway all up and down the whole east coast of Florida, every one that crosses the intercoastal waterway, they all basically run east and west. Our causeway runs southwest, northeast. And so it's the best spot for kiteboarding and windsurfing on the east coast of Florida. I mean, you think about on those days when we have a raging wind out of the southwest, all the kiteboarders that are out there, they come from all over the state. They watch the weather, and when those conditions happen, they come to Titusville to go kiteboard and windsurfing. And it's because of the angle of the causeway. So think about it.
So was that a happy mistake, or was that something they did on
No,
purpose?
I think it had to do with the original bridge. There's like a point that sticks out called Sandpoint. And then the closest, there's like a curve, you know, where the land kind of sticks out on the east side from the Merritt Island Wildlife Refuge. And so that was the closest point to get across the river at Titusville, was northeast, southwest. And so there we are.
Just happened
So
to work out to be pretty amazing.
It is amazing.
Yeah.
But that's the reason we have so many horseshoe crabs too. Because this, you know, when the wind blows out of the southwest, the water piles up in that corner where the causeway meets the east shore of the river along Gator Creek Dike Road. And so the crabs, they need big wind. Our crabs are different up here. Like the crabs over in Tampa Bay and pretty much everywhere else, they spawn on the lunar cycles during either the spring or the fall. So new moon, full moon, that's when you get your highest ocean tides. And they want the highest water so they can get higher up on the beach to lay their eggs. Because if they lay their eggs down by the water, you know, where it usually is, the eggs will rot. They can't be submersed all the time. They have to be in damp sand, but not submersed. So our crabs use the big wind and high waves to literally surf up on the beach and get high up, and that's where they lay their eggs. And during certain wind conditions, in like January, February, and March, sometimes there's a solid ribbon of crabs, you know, that goes all the way from where the rocks stop on the south end of the causeway around that corner to where the rocks start along the Gator Creek Dike. So our causeway is very special in many, many ways. So anyway, there I was doing my homework under the glow of a dim, pickup light for my net, and Banana Creek, which is next to Gator Creek. Banana Creek was one of my favorite places to fish, and there's a lot of big alligators.
There's a couple alligators there.
Yeah. So they like to come try to yank fish out of my net, right? So and
terrifying.
They didn't like the nickel mullet, they wanted the 50 cent trout.
Of course.
And then after a gator, and a gill net works by the fish pokes its head through the net, and once its gills pass through and open up, it can't back itself out. That's how a gill net works. So the gators would swim up to a big fish and chomp down on it, and I could tell they were there because I'd see the cork line start going up and down, and I saw, oh no, another gator's got one of my fish. So I'd be out there in the middle of the night, poling my boat, whacking a 10-foot gator on the head. So
Terrifying.
I loved it. I loved being out on the river by myself at night.
There's something special about it.
There really
There
is.
really is something special about it.
And like when you're on a calm night when the river is like glass, you can't tell where the stars stop and the water begins because the stars are reflecting in the water.
It's all molds together.
Yep. And you know what? The north end of our river, north of the railroad bridge, it's still like that.
Yeah.
There's no light pollution up there. I'll never forget the time that they turned on the mercury vapor lights in Titusville. And this was something they were so proud of, these mercury vapor lights, because before that we had nice dim white lights with the big shades that directed the light down. And I was out fishing that afternoon, and it got dark, and all of a sudden the sky in the west just lit up orange. I thought Titusville was on fire.
Oh, yeah.
And I said, what is that? And then I found out later, that was the new street lights. And that was the way life was going to be, and I hated it because it totally changed the way the sky was. We still had a dark sky to the east, but when you looked at Titusville, it looked like it was on fire. And that's another cool thing about our area, too. Like, if you look at a satellite image at night that shows all the lights in Florida, and you can see I-4 corridor, and you see the whole East Coast is solid lights. And there's this one little thin black strip that goes from Cape Canaveral up to about Oak Hill. And that's like the only place on the whole East Coast of Florida. Astronomers come here to look at the stars because they have you can stand on the west shore of the Indian River north of Titusville and look east, and you can see a dark sky. You're not looking at the lights of a bunch of condos and hotels. So we live in a magical area here. So
it's pretty special without a doubt.
So my parents, they really, all I wanted to do was fish. I wanted to grow up to be a commercial fisherman. I loved their lifestyle. I loved being out on the water all the time. But my family wasn't that crazy about that idea. So they sent me to college at FIT. There was they had a satellite school back then called the Hydrospace Technical Institute. And it trained, they had two training programs, one to train kids to go out and work on the oil tender rigs. And that was called marine technology. And then they had ocean technology, and that was a 2-year training course to train you to be a lab, work in a lab on a research boat. That was back when NOAA was still getting money. There was actually money for ocean research back then. And so I went to the ocean tech part, and it was pretty cool because there wasn't very many women. There was 150 students, and out of that there was 9 women. So it was very small, and being one of the only girls, we got away with murder. So we got anything we wanted, So I wanted to take celestial navigation. Well, that's not in your major, your area. That's for the marine tech people. Okay, I'll quit. Yeah, you can take celestial navigation, sure. I want to bring my dog to class. My dog went to
No,
class
you can't
every
bring
day.
it. Yeah. Oh, wow.
And so it was
That's
it was
funny
kind of
stuff.
cool.
Awesome.
But then they moved it down to Jensen Beach. So I was driving back and forth from home, still fishing in the river because it was down in Cocoa Beach. But then it got moved to Jensen Beach, and they bought a bigger campus. And so then I had to leave home. So I took a smaller boat with less net down to Jensen Beach and still continued fishing in the river while I was going to college. So that was pretty cool. So when I graduated, I came back up and I was working for my dad at his boat plant, but I didn't really care for grinding fiberglass. I mean, it's miserable.
No, I can't believe that.
No, our family, we always had itchy clothes,
Oh, yeah.
because, we couldn't afford to have two washing machines, one for our work clothes and one for our non-work clothes. So we had itchy clothes. And also my dad, my brothers and I worked out in the boat plant. And my sister, she's smarter than we are. My sister, she worked in the office. So all of us worked when we were really little. And my dad always said, just because your family owns the boat plant doesn't make you better than any other workers. You're just a worker. And like he would give us the crummiest jobs of all.
Oh,
like,
didn't want to show favoritism. so,
Not at
yeah.
all. Absolutely not. So, one of the jobs I got, because I was smaller, much smaller then, I usually got stuck grinding the inside of the fuel tanks on the shrimp boats. Because they'd cut a little hole in the side of the tank, and I'd crawl up inside and grind the inside of the fuel tanks.
Oh, wow.
And it was brutal. But so we there was an electrician, the guy that put all the electronics on the shrimp boats. He was taking a shrimp boat down to Trinidad. And so me and my sister and two of her friends, we went along to deliver this shrimp boat down to Trinidad. So we went all through the islands, and it took 3 weeks, and
Wow.
we stopped at all the islands on the way. And when we got to Trinidad, the family, they had bought multiple boats from my dad. They had a whole fleet of Thompson trawlers, and they invited us to stay and hang around. So my sister and her friend, they flew back home, and I stayed in Trinidad.
Wow.
So that's when I made up my mind. I'm going fishing on the ocean. So now I don't care what you guys want or do. I'm a grown up now. I want to go fishing on the ocean. So when I did come home, and my parents picked me up at the airport, and we came back, and we were sitting at the table, and I told them that I was going to go fishing. And so they said, okay, we're going to let you do what you want to do, but you are not going to hang out in the bars down at the port and drink with everybody. And if you're going to go fishing, you're going to work. You can go down there and you can work. Well, all the fishermen had this arrangement with my dad. If something broke on their boats, he would fix it for free, and then they pay him back, after they caught some fish or installments or whatever. But most of the boats at the port were built by my dad, and so I go down to the port. And I start walking up and down the dock, asking, are you hiring? Nobody would hire me because they didn't want to make my dad mad, right?
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
They knew my parents didn't want me to go fishing, so they didn't want to make them upset. So I couldn't get a job, and I went down there every day. However, they would hire me to work on their boats. So I had to dive tanks. I scraped the bottom of most of the boats at the port. I rebuilt their fuel tanks for them. They would pull their boats and put them up on land, and I'd work on them. They didn't have any problem hiring me to do that kind of work, but to actually throw the lines and leave the dock and go out in the ocean, So finally, the meanest captain at the port, this guy, he was an alcoholic, and he yelled all the time, and he was so awful he couldn't keep a crew. So he came and met with my parents, and he said that he promised that he would take care of me and he would teach me how to use electronics and everything if they would let me work for him. So I survived on his boat for 6 months, and then there was another guy that came along, and this guy had just bought a brand new 28-foot Delta, and he rigged it out with all brand new swordfish gear, and his dream had been to become a fisherman, right? He wasn't even a fisherman, but he bought the
But he
boat,
bought
bought
all
the
the
gear
stuff.
and everything, and he was ready to go fishing. And his wife was pregnant with twins, and he had applied for a job at the Cape, and he got it, right? So he had to decide, do I take the job at the Cape like I should do, or
Right,
do
oh,
I
yeah.
go out and try to go fishing? He took the job at the Cape. So now here comes the next guy coming to my parents, and he brought the electronics guy that worked for my dad, installing the electronics at the boat plant. The mean captain never did show me how to work the Loran or anything. I mean, I basically worked on the deck. So Captain Don came and he said, I will go out with Laurilee until I'm confident that she can run the boat by herself. So he did. He went out on about 3 trips and taught me. Back then, we were still using Loran A. I mean, it was very primitive back then still. A paper machine depth finder. None of the beautiful electronics that we have now. The fish don't have a chance now. They really don't. They did back then.
It was a fair fight back then.
It was a fair fight back then. It's not now. So he taught me how to use all the electronics and everything, and then he turned me loose. And being the competitive person that I am, and also having half a college degree education, I made it for 3 years at college, but that gave me the tools to understand thermoclines and figure out how to set my gear where the cold water meets the warm water and where the bait layer is and all that. I caught more fish than everybody else, right?
That's
And
awesome.
so everybody was like, the guys were like, well, we don't want Laurilee out on the ocean because she's a girl and we're going to have to babysit her, right? But none of them, I mean, the ones that didn't know me didn't realize that I grew up in a boat plant. I built boats for,
Yeah.
for,
Right.
for,
Oh,
for
yeah.
years. And so I ended up babysitting them because I had a bunch of parts from the boat plant, extra parts, anything they needed. If they needed a spare alternator, I had one on my boat. So, and I caught more fish than them. I would leave in the middle of the night from where the group was fishing. I would just take off in the middle of the night to get away from them, and I'd go find another place to fish. And it would take them two or 3 days to find me, but eventually they would. But it was magnificent. But back then, we were fishing on some fish stocks that had never had a hook thrown at them before.
Wow.
I mean, it was like pioneer days out there or something. It was amazing. But then we overfished, and I was a big part of it. I know we overfished. We fished on spawning fish, when we shouldn't have. And so in the 1980s, late 1980s, it became apparent that overfishing was an issue and that the federal government was going to step in. They were ramping up the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation Act and adding additional language to it. And it became apparent that it was going to be you'd have to do a lot of paperwork and really want to fish to stay in business. And I had met a man, and so staying out for 3 weeks at a time was kind of hard on a relationship. And my parents were just starting the restaurant, so I thought, okay, well, maybe it's time to get off the ocean. There's other parts to the story, but I can't tell them on
Oh, sure.
on family.
Yes.
Family
It's a family
podcast.
show. Yes.
The customs agents decided that I was running drugs. I wasn't, but they thought, they were targeting us. My brother was on the boat with me, and they were targeting us, and we spent a lot of time bobbing around with 18-year-old Coast Guard guys pointing guns at us while they tore the boat apart looking for drugs. That got real old.
I'm sure, yeah.
And,
Oh, yeah.
and after one of the customs agents that was harassing us horribly, one time told me that he knew that we were running drugs because no father in his right mind would send his daughter out to sea. and he said, if I don't catch you, I'm going to plant drugs on your boat. So that scared me and my brother to death.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
We left the ocean. And so I started working at the restaurant, which was at that time, I think we had about 100 seats. When it started, it was a 30-seat diner.
Wow.
What
my
year
dad-
was that?
That was in 1983,
Okay.
over 40 years ago.
Wow.
So my dad had fish cases that you could look through the fish cases and into the kitchen, and you could pick out a fish and he would clean it for you and cook it, and you could see all that going on. On the west side of the lighthouse room, there was a big window there that looked into a room where he had a giant smoker. He was always smoking mullet, and so people could get fresh smoked mullet right off the rack, and
Which is incredible. By the
which
way.
was incredible.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, smoked mullet. But now hardly anybody smokes because the HACCP regulations are so strict when you're smoked fish.
Yep.
It's nobody does it anymore. It's too much of a hassle to follow all the rules and all the temperatures. And I mean, my grandfather smoked mullet in a refrigerator or a 50-gallon oil drum, right? He never put a thermometer in one to make sure it was the right temperature. But you have to have like a machine that records the temperature the whole time that the fish is smoking now. And you have to have a screened-in enclosure. It has to be outside. There's so many rules. So we started out as a 30-seat diner. We served almost everything we served came out of the Indian River. We had, sea trout and definitely mullet, all kinds of ways, and clams and oysters and spots and croakers and whiting and anything that came out of the river. That's what we served. I serve nothing out of the Indian River today.
Really?
It's so sad. I mean, just in the 4 decades that the restaurant has been there, the river has gone from this beautiful, productive, crystal clear seagrass beds as far as you could see to what it is today. And this one of the unfortunate things is like when people move here and they drive across our bridges and our causeways and they look out over the river and it's beautiful on the surface and you might get lucky and see a dolphin. But underneath, it's not beautiful.
It's hard to explain to somebody that hasn't seen it from the
'cause
prime.
they
'cause
think it's
really,
normal.
Yeah, it's really hard to explain it to them.
Yeah.
Like that used to look like tap water. Yeah, that used to look like tap water.
You could go out to the end of the pier and it was 10 feet deep and see the bottom out there. You could watch the fish swimming up to your bait. And, during the last big algae bloom in 2020, I water test too. That's another thing I do. My psyche desk, I would lose it at 6 inches. I couldn't see it anymore. Ask me a question.
Yeah, so I'll ask you the same question I asked our guest last week. What gives you hope about our river system? Is there anything going on that gives you hope?
Yeah, absolutely. What I saw happen in Mosquito Lagoon, it gives me hope. It really does. Because 4 years ago, the bottom of the Mosquito Lagoon was a desert too. I mean, the algae bloom went up there too, and it killed every blade of seagrass. I mean, there was nothing. There wasn't any drift out. There was nothing. The same thing happened in the Indian River. But Mosquito Lagoon has come back on its own with no help at all. We haven't planted any seagrass. That's another thing I do. I harvest seagrass roots, and we grow them out in tanks to use for planting projects. But the Mosquito Lagoon came back on its own. So when I was water testing, I noticed that there was seagrass blowing up against the shore, and it had roots. And I had been, well, that's a whole nother story, but I helped with the first nursery grown seagrass planting project in the Indian River Lagoon. I had met this guy. His name's Jim Anderson from Sea and Shoreline, and I go to a lot of meetings that I don't even know why I go to, just because I want to find stuff out, you know.
Yeah.
And if you don't go to meetings or talk to people, you don't find stuff out. So
That's true.
this was billed as a presentation by a seagrass farmer from the West Coast who was trying to get a project started in the Indian River Lagoon, and it was going to be at the St. Lucie County Mosquito Control Office. So I had to get up at like 5 o'clock in the morning to drive down to Fort Pierce and try to figure out where the mosquito control office was at the airport, right?
Yeah, right.
So, but I finally located it, came in late as usual, but here was this guy, and he had these big round cages on the floor, and he had little pots with seagrass growing in them, and he was going to take these little pots with the seagrass and plant them in the river and put these big metal cages over them so the manatees can't eat the seagrass. And he was going to do that near a stormwater outfall in the Indian River. And so you know, we traded cards, and he's, because, you know, I told him that I was interested in the river. At that time, the river wasn't that bad. This was like about 2012, 2013 time frame, and we'd gone through the first big blue-green algae blooms, you know, that happened after the 2010 freezes, but, you know, we still had 60% of our seagrass left. And so you take my card, you know, we may cross paths someday. So a couple of years later, we had the big, you know, more algae blooms, and we lost more seagrass. And I get this call from Mr. Anderson, and he says, I have some of your seagrass growing in tanks over at my sod farm. And he said, there's an opportunity to plant it in the Indian River, and but, you know, I need funding to at least cover my costs, and but I think that this is something that you might be interested in. So I went down and I looked at what was going on, and what they were doing is they were extending the end of the runway for the Merritt Island Airport. They were adding another, because planes kept falling off the end of the runway and ending up in the Banana River.
I remember that.
Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
So they were adding on to, and they were going to impact several acres of seagrass by extending the runway. So the Water Management District told them that they had to dig up the seagrass and store it, and then plant it. There was some dredge holes on the north side of the runway, along the runway, that they were going to, well, no, they were just going to plant the seagrass somewhere. Well, then the Water Management District said, we don't want you to dig up the seagrass anymore. We're just going to bury it. We're going to fill in those dredge holes and bring those holes up to the level where they should be, and that's going to be the mitigation for burying the seagrass at the end of the runway. Well, Mr. Anderson said they might need that seagrass someday. So it took them a bunch of trips, but they came over and they dug up the seagrass, and he took it over and he planted it in tanks over on his sod farm in Ruskin. And then he called me up and he said, I have your seagrass. You're going to need it, but this is what happened. And he explained the whole thing about how the dredge holes got filled in and everything instead of the seagrass. And he says, I really want to plant seagrass in the Indian River. The project that they did down in it was the wrong place to plant it. You wouldn't plant seagrass. Think about it. Why would you plant seagrass in front of a stormwater outfall where you have fresh water coming out of an outfall all the time?
Yeah.
So that thing didn't work. So he says, I know it'll work here because it's not near a stormwater outfall. I know the seagrass is going to grow. I want to prove that this can be done in the Indian River Lagoon. We've been doing it on the West Coast, but it'll work in the Indian River Lagoon. And I said, well, how much will it cost? $55,000. Like, oh man. So he says, look, you can do it. You know everybody in the county. You can All you got to do is talk to them, and they'll write checks for you.
Good
So
Lord.
I committed
pressure.
to it, right? Right, no pressure. So I hit my parents first, right? So they wrote a $5,000 check, and I wrote a $5,000 check, and I beat up my partner at the restaurant, and the restaurant wrote a $5,000 check. So now it's time for me to go out and start talking to business people, right? So I called up Jim Swan. And so Jim met with me, and I showed him, I had my little iPad with me, and I'm showing him the things that they'd done and explaining about it. And he wrote me a $5,000 check. And that was the last $5,000 check I got, right? So now I'm meeting with people, and they're looking at me like I have two heads, you know? It's like, you want me to give you money to do what?
I love it though, because this is literally the definition, and yes, also a pun, of grassroots
Oh, you're not gonna
efforts
say it.
to fix
said it.
community issues, and I love it. That's the most beautiful thing in the whole world to me.
So
I
I'm
did say it.
floundering. I'm dead in the water.
Floundering.
I've given Jim the $20,000, and I still owe $35,000, right? And I'm like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? So then Keith Winston from the zoo, he heard about the project, and he called me up and he said, look, the zoo wants to get involved. And this is what got the zoo involved in all the restoration that they're doing now. The zoo wants to get involved in lagoon restoration. We think we can be a big player. And he said, I'll write Jim the check for the $35,000 from the zoo, and then you can pay me back however long it did. It took me several years to pay the
Wow.
zoo back, a few $1,000s at a time, but I paid the zoo back. The project got completed. 2 weeks after we planted the seagrass, we planted some of it out on the flats, and we planted some of it under the manatee cages. 2 weeks after we planted the seagrass, here came Hurricane Matthew.
No.
It buried everything.
No.
Buried it all.
Oh no.
But then the wind blew out of the north, a few weeks later, and it uncovered it. And that's what happens in the river. The seagrass gets buried sometimes by a storm, and then it gets unburied. And that's just the natural thing. That seagrass is still down there. It's been through all those algae blooms and everything, and so it's still down there.
That's amazing.
So now we're working on the national, Dwayne DeFries, who I understand was here last week.
Yes,
Yep.
ma'am.
I worship Dwayne. I mean, he's
a very
is the
knowledgeable
bomb.
man.
Yeah.
Very knowledgeable.
So Dwayne's working right now on a $14 million NOAA grant. There's more money than we've ever dreamed of on the table right now because of Biden's infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Bill. They have billions of dollars available for coastal resiliency projects. This is a fisheries, $240 billion for fisheries enhancement. Well, what better thing could you do than, get seagrass to come back for fisheries enhancement? So he's applying for a grant. They're using the Marine Discovery Center up in Volusia. That'll be theirs. Brevard Zoo is involved. There's a couple more organizations that will be using volunteers to plant the seagrass, and Sea and Shoreline is providing a lot of the seagrass. Well, a lot of that seagrass from Sea and Shoreline is coming from me and a couple of friends that are picking rhizomes off the beach in Mosquito Lagoon. And so that's another thing I've been working on. And I have to say that, the restaurant, I got off track, but, we've grown through the years. Once my dad added rock shrimp to the menu, that's when the restaurant really got busy and the word got out. The restaurant, the way it became world famous, it wasn't really anything we did. It was actually because of NASA and the space shuttle program. Because when they were first shooting the first space shuttles, there were reporters that came from all over the world, to come watch these launches. And there weren't very many places to eat in Titusville, and so they would end up at the restaurant, and they loved it, and they would go back to Paris or wherever they came from, and they would talk about this seafood restaurant in Titusville, And that's why people from all over the world started coming here, is because of the coverage of NASA and the space launches. And we would get mentioned in these broadcasts all over the world. It was kind of funny.
What are the biggest lessons you've learned since your early days at the restaurant to where you are now? Or what are some of the things that you've seen really, really change, or things that really stick with you that have evolved over the years?
The biggest thing is social media.
Oh,
Absolutely.
yes.
The biggest impact, the biggest thing that changed our world was social media. Because if you have a guest and they're unhappy and you don't go to their table and do everything you can to try to make them happy, they will go out in the parking lot and sit in their car and kill you on social media.
Yeah.
They won't even leave the property. And they're giving you 1 star and talking about the horrible service. And
As a restaurant, how do you battle that? You just try to go above and beyond with everybody?
My managers, our waitresses, we preach to them all the time. If you even sense that you have a guest that's not unhappy, get a manager to the table. And then the manager goes out and tries to talk to them and whatever. I mean, sometimes we have to buy a meal. We replace a lobster, or we take the lobster off of the combo, or whatever. And then sometimes they'll get out the door and we don't realize that they were unhappy. But so we respond to the bad posts and try to contact them, and we try to do everything we can to make them happy. But social media has also been good too, because we get a lot of 5-star. We get way more 5-star
Right.
ratings than we do
Yeah.
1-stars. And
Sure.
but that is the biggest change. The other thing, of course, was the death of the Indian River. The change of our menu makeup from having everything truly be local to our shrimp are still local. We only use domestic shrimp. We try to use real domestic seafood that's caught in United States waters as much as possible. For mahi, if we can't get it out of U.S. waters, we'll use other, like Russian cod. For a while was really, really nice and a really good product, and we were using Russian cod for a while. We have always used Ecuadorian wild-caught mahi, because there's not enough mahi caught in the United States to keep the price low enough, the price point low enough to where we could serve it in the restaurant. If we had fresh mahi, it would be way more expensive than what our mahi is.
With fish, it's going to be a nonstop challenge, trying to get the correct price point with the fish and what's going to be something you can sell and still make some money on and not charge people $100 for a plate of food.
Mm-hmm, exactly. Yeah.
People don't realize that, it's crazier than gasoline, the prices with fish. I mean, it'll be $1 a pound one day and $10 a pound the next day, depending on what the people are catching offshore.
Right.
Yeah, so it's, there's a lot to that. It's a whole science on its own right.
There is. Right now, the domestic shrimp fleet is in tatters. I mean, it's catastrophic what's happened to them, because 2 years ago, there was a ban on imports from countries that didn't use turtle excluder devices in their trawl nets. And then all of a sudden, 35 countries all of a sudden started using turtle excluder devices in their nets. I don't believe it, but the ban was lifted on 35 nations, and they flooded the United States with imports. Even though they were wild caught, it was still imported shrimp. And that, combined with the farm-raised shrimp, the freezers are full. The buyers don't even want domestic wild-caught shrimp caught by American boats right now, because their freezers are full of imported stuff. So the boats are tied to the docks. They're getting 1980s prices for these beautiful American shrimp. It's really, really sad. So that's another thing too, is when we first opened the restaurant, there wasn't such a thing as imported shrimp. That's another thing that we've had to deal with, and have to educate people about why our shrimp are a little more expensive than what they get at, another seafood restaurant. Well, it's because our shrimp are caught by American boats, American fishermen in Florida waters, and they taste better, and they don't have any chemicals added to them. You don't know what you're getting in a farm-raised shrimp that comes from China
Oh, it's true.
or Vietnam. The conditions, the ponds that they grow these shrimp in are nasty, and they put hormones in the water to make the shrimp grow faster, and they put antibiotics in the water because the water's so dirty, and you're eating that when you eat those imported shrimp.
So one of the last questions I got for you before we end this, and we're gonna have you back and chat with you again because
Yeah.
this has been awesome.
Oh yeah,
Um,
this is amazing.
You were talking about earlier about the armored banks on the river and
Yeah.
how everything's changed that way and how it makes it tough on the horseshoe crabs. I've often wondered what impact that has had on diamondback terrapins and several other species of wildlife that I imagine when you were a kid were in large abundance. So tell us a little bit about that. Like when you were a kid, did you see a lot of diamondback terrapins? What did
Yes,
you see
absolutely.
then that
There-
you
you'd
don't
see-
see now non-fish
You'd
wise?
see their little head. They have like a little triangle head. You wouldn't
Yeah.
see the whole turtle. You'd just see their noses sticking up, all along the shoreline. Absolutely. The loss of sandy beaches hurts the diamondback terrapins. It hurts the horseshoe crabs. Almost every fish in the river eats baby horseshoe crabs.
What are some of the things you used to
so-
see a lot of then that you just maybe don't even see at all now?
Blowfish,
Blowfish.
Really?
Yeah.
moon jellies. Remember the
Mhm.
four-eyed moon jellyfish?
do,
Tell
yeah.
me when you've seen one of them lately. Yeah.
Probably mid 90s.
Yeah.
Maybe I saw one in the
When-
mid 90s.
When I was a kid, those moon jellies would just show up in the summertime, and they would be so thick that it seemed like you could walk on them.
Really?
And they would be that thick all the way from the bottom to the surface of the river.
I wonder what
And
those
there's
were a food supply
millions
for.
of them, huh?
I wonder what those were a food supply for.
Well,
Something had to have
there-
ate 'em.
Sea turtles eat jellyfish.
Yeah, I wonder what in
Yeah.
our river. I mean, I know we have sea
Dolphins.
turtles
Oh.
that end up there occasionally, but I wonder what in our
Yeah,
river ate
I
those.
don't know, but they
Huh.
were just a part of the river.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And mullet, my dad we'd go get a bucket of chicken from the Kentucky Fried Chicken and go sit on the causeway and watch the mullet jump for entertainment.
I remember when I was in high school here how they had the mullet net band. That
Yeah.
was whenever we were here in the
Yeah,
mid 90s. Went from not seeing a whole lot to you saw a lot of mullet come back, but it never quite went to where it was when I was a
It-
kid.
it
And
never
I'm sure
got-
when you were a
yeah.
kid it was even crazier than that
It-
because
it-
we'd see groups of mullet for as far as you could
as far
see.
as you could see. Yeah, the same school of mullet would be going under the pier for like 20 minutes, just like a river of mullet. And but the other thing that the hard armoring impacts is seagrass. So you've got two different things that are affecting our seagrass coming back. And number one is water clarity. So the more the less clarity you have in the water, the less sunlight can reach the bottom. So what's happened is the edge of the seagrass has come towards the shore because there's not enough sunlight reaching it where it used to. And so that outer edge of the seagrass has moved inward. And then the inward edge of the seagrass, when you have a sandy beach, the seagrass will grow almost right up to the edge, to the water's edge. Well, think about what happens when waves hit a seawall. They slam into it, and it makes turbulence, and it scours the bottom. So for like 200 or 300 feet out from a seawall, nothing lives on the bottom. No benthic creatures, no worms, nothing lives there because the bottom is scoured from all the wave action from hitting seawalls. It's not quite as bad when they hit rocks, but it still has the same effect. So you've lost the inward part of where the seagrass grows, and you've lost the outside edge where the seagrass grows. So we've actually reduced the area where seagrass can grow. So there's so much that's different now. I mean, I can just go down the list. I used to see stingrays that were 6 feet wide, and now, if I see a stingray that's that big, that's a big cause for celebration.
Yeah.
But the moon jellies, that's they've been replaced by comb jellies,
Right.
which comb jellies can live in nasty water. So we have when the bioluminescence disappears in the summertime, that's about the same time that the comb jellies start coming. And so that bioluminescence that has made us so famous for the kayak tours, it's because of the algae blooms.
Yeah, it's not good stuff.
Pyridinium. It is an algae.
It's not good stuff.
Yeah, it's not good.
It's not good things. But
Been good for the kayakers. But
yeah, they've made some money on that for sure. Miss
But-
Laurilee, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
We would love to have you back again.
I can talk for hours.
We could.
You've been involved in so many things.
There's so much we need to talk about. There's so much we need to continue this conversation and talk about. And
I do want to make one final comment.
Please.
Is that I have such good partners and such good staff at the restaurant that they have given me the freedom to not be chained to the restaurant like most restaurant owners are.
Right.
You know, I have a wonderful staff, and they're very proud that I'm able to go out in the community and do the work that I do. So
yeah,
I
you
have
wear
to
so
put in
many
a plug
hats.
for them.
You wear so many hats.
It's only because they have given me the ability to do so.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you so much for being here. Again, thank you for all you do for our so many people in the communities, so many animals, so many types of wildlife that can't say thank you. So we're saying thank you, and we will 1,000% have you back on here again and continue this conversation.
Okay, yeah, I want to talk about development at the Space Center and how that impacted the Indian River Lagoon in the 1960s
Yeah.
and the potential for equal or worse damage from fresh water coming into the Indian River Lagoon from all the stormwater, from all the new development. And the city of Titusville, we've done that. I mean, we have reduced the salinity regime in the northern Indian River Lagoon. That's another reason that we're having difficulty with clam restoration and oyster restoration. Those projects can't be done up here because the water's too fresh.
We were talking about that a little bit with the stuff that's moving from Merritt Island over here. There's a lot of things that need to change, and you're on the forefront of all of it. And yeah, we'll get you back on here the next couple of weeks, and we're going to finish this conversation, and it'll be wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you so much for taking the time. We really appreciate
and
you.
And I would add, thanks for all that you do, Frank. Yes.
I'm just trying. It's all we can do
Me
is try.
too. That's it.
Yeah, all we can do is try. Bill, Cindy, another episode in the book.
Yes, sir.
All right. I guess maybe we'll catch you guys in about 5 or 10 minutes, which will
Maybe
seem
so.
like a couple of weeks to you guys. But
It will.
All right.
It will, indeed.
all right, y'all. Thank you for tuning to the EEARSS podcast. You can find us on all platforms by searching EEARSS, EEARSS. We have an event coming up January 19th in Cocoa Village. It is the EEARSS to the Environment Ecofest. There'll be speakers there from nonprofits and nonprofit organizations all over the Spacecoast. They're making a big difference here locally doing things. We have so many people to thank for that. From Fischer Nissan, the Brevard Zoo, Spacecoast Executive Airport. I mean, I could go on and on and on. There's so many people here locally that are behind this and helping making it all come together. Can't thank you all enough, and thank you for tuning in. We'll catch you all next week. Bye-bye.